I'm going to begin this morning with a story. I'm going to go back, as the Irish Rovers sing that song a long time ago when the earth was green, back to the year of 1972. I was 16 years old, and my brother and I were involved in playing soccer. It's a sport that I've played all my life. And we had both signed up and began to play for a senior men's team that was a team that was a community team, a town team, and we played other towns in the province of New Brunswick. And so on a particular day, we slipped away with my older brother, and he was old enough to drive, so we took the car and we went off to play soccer, and there was absolutely nothing strange about that. We did it many times, except it was a Sunday afternoon. And on Sunday afternoons, we read that we must remember the Sabbath day, and we must keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your sons or your daughters, your male servants or your female servants or your livestock, or the sojourners who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The Ten Commandments, that's one of them. Commandment number 4. You remember just a couple of weeks ago we talked about the Ten Commandments, and I mentioned back then that it's a list of commandments that expresses the most elemental, non-negotiable requirements of life with Yahweh. Now in the Protestant church, Sunday is our Sabbath. But there really seems to be far too little Sabbath in the Sabbath. Now that Sunday afternoon when we got home after the game, which we won, I remember it vividly because of all the details that took place. My brother got in trouble because he's the one who drove the car. But we were in caca because we had slipped away, and it wasn't the soccer that was the problem, it was the day in which it was played. And thou shalt not play soccer on Sunday is in the modern translation. And so over the next few weeks, what I really am going to try to do is, and I pray that as we journey together over these next few weeks, that we will come to a much healthier understanding and practice of Sabbath. Is it an ancient practice, or is it a present practice? It's a good question. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book An Altar in the World, writes this as she reflects on her experience of Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it boring. The Sabbath was the day that you could not wear blue jeans, could not play ball, could not ride bikes, could not go to the movies, could not do anything but go to church in the morning and again at night, with a wasteland in between, during which old people with little hair left on their heads, but a great deal growing out of their ears, sat around in rocking chairs talking about incredibly dull things, and you could not creep away for more than 12 minutes without your mother yelling, "What are you up to?" Sabbath was the day you could not, because the Bible said so. That comes out of a chapter in which she writes, or has called, the practice of saying no. Walter Brueggemann, in his book, Saying No to the Culture of Now, as he reflects on Sabbath. And so for many, and I would suspect most all of us here this morning, my intention certainly in this journey is not to make us all feel guilty about playing ball on Sunday or going home to get your lawn mowed that you plan to do this afternoon. I really pray that we will have a totally different understanding than what most of us grew up with when it came to the Sabbath. You know, I missed the ending of Disney World every Sunday because we had to be in church and we had to leave at 6:45. So I never saw the ending of any Disney World. The Magical World of Disney came on at 6 o'clock on Sunday nights. But for many, the Sabbath has somehow morphed into Sunday, the day of resurrection, and it is fulfilled by attending a religious event called Sunday morning church service. Once that's finished, the day is spent in routine yard maintenance, diversion, and preparation for the week that is to come. Author Dan Allender has some trouble with this and says, "It cannot be shouted louder from the rooftops. This is not a Sabbath. This is Sabbath breaking." Rabbi Abraham Herschel, in his book, The Sabbath, says, "All our life should be a pilgrimage to the seventh day. The thought and appreciation of what this day may bring to us should be ever present in our minds. For the Sabbath is the counterpoint of living, the melody sustained throughout all agitations which menace our conscience, our awareness of God's presence in the world." Wendell Berry writes, "Sabbath observance invites us to stop. It invites us to rest. It asks us to notice that while we rest, the world continues without our help. It invites us to delight in the world's beauty and abundance." Remember the Sabbath. How do we find this place? This place where we can lay down our burdens. Jesus's and ours Jewish heritage can profoundly inform the practice of rest in our everyday lives. The observation of the Sabbath, in many ways, the centerpiece of lived Jewish experience, is the built-in practice of rest and renewal in the Jewish tradition. If you read the journey of the Jewish people in the Old Testament, you will find that Sabbath was front and center to their entire lives. Even in the journey through the wilderness, when they wandered aimlessly around the wilderness, complained about no food, and God sent them that wonderful, whatever it was, manna. But even then, they were to collect double portions on the day before Sabbath, because they would not have any on the Sabbath. It's unique and it's profound. It's an integration of worship, and certainly is. It's an integration of worship and rest and celebration and renewal, and it's a beautiful model for all people of faith. Rabbi Herschel writes, "There's a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. Not to own, but to give. Not to control, but to share. Not to subdue, but to be in accord." While its meaning and its practice merit a very in-depth study, and really one only begins to truly understand what Sabbath is when you really begin to experience it. But let's just do a short review this morning of the scriptural basis for the Jewish Sabbath that are provided for us, sort of as a blueprint to anyone seeking to fully and to passionately live their faith in the world. And I take this out of a writing by both Rabbi Herschel and Rabbi Greenberg, in which they sort of reflect on the Sabbath and the Jewish way, or living the holidays, as they call it. So they in that writing will lead you through a journey of understanding and a journey of inviting us to experience, not just know, the joy of the Sabbath. For the Jews, observation of the Sabbath is both commandment, for failure to keep the Sabbath was originally punishable by what? Death. So it was a pretty serious commandment. But it's also a gift. So important that it is to be reinforced with three very, very different biblical justifications of things that have happened in the life of the Jewish people. First of all, it's a means of preserving and obeying the covenant, the plan that God made with the Israelite people. And then it's an imitation of God, because we know that God created the world in 6 days, whatever that means. That's not part of the discussion this morning, to figure out whether it was 6 literal days or 6 whatever. But this biblical creation story is a creation that took place in 6 days, and what happened on the 7th? God rested. Sabbath. And of course, we've packaged that into church, because it's on the 7th day of the week. And then the third area that the Sabbath was to be this reminder was the whole journey in and out of Egypt. A remembrance of Egypt, which included both the experience of slavery, and with that was the rider and a caution about enslaving others, and also that this was a remembrance of the God who liberates, that brought the Israelite people out of bondage and set them free. So we see first of all that Sabbath allows the faithful to deeply reconnect with God and with their identity as a covenant people. And friends, we are part of that covenant. We are covenant people. That covenant that God has made with the Israelites, He has made with us through the person of Jesus Christ and the presence of the Spirit of God. In the words of Rabbi Herschel, the Sabbath is meaningful to people and is meaningful to God. It stands in relation to both and is a sign of the covenant entered into by both. The day of rest allows people to reclaim their fundamental identity first and foremost as loved by God for who they are as God's creation, not for what they produce, not for what they own, not for what they create. It's a proclamation. And it's a proclamation that says, I am what I do. The individual reasserts the primacy of human value and the principle of the intrinsic worth of human existence. For the Jews, the Sabbath is a weekly claiming of their heritage. An insistence that their primary identity is not as citizens or workers or consumers, but as children of God who are invited to a covenant relationship with God. Secondly, it's related to that concept of identity. The themes of creation and the imitation of God. Since creation is this ongoing process in which humanity serves as co-creators with God, the perfection of the world is contingent upon humanity's active and passionate participation. And that's what we've been talking about when we talk about caring for creation. An ongoing, active, and passionate participation. 6 days of the week are committed to co-creating. But the seventh enables Jews to rest in the dream of perfection. To stop the struggle. And to live as if the dream had been realized. And so, when we think about Sabbath, we can see that it provides a very critical pause in an often overwhelming quest for perfecting the world. The weekly encounter, and this is the important part of understanding and practicing Sabbath, is that it is a weekly encounter with messianic perfection. It saves us from internalizing the indignity and the injustices of the status quo. Taste of salvation. A taste of salvation gives us new energy to resist the counsels of despair and to press on for higher levels of dignity and justice for all. So we make this connection and we make this identity with the Creator in the practice of Sabbath. But the third thing I want to say this morning about Sabbath is that it also critically sets limits on the temptation to assign too much importance to the act of creating, which is work, or to the things that are created. The Shabbat, as the Hebrew word goes, offers an alternative. Sort of a rhythm of work and abstinence. Alternation of creatorhood, and creaturehood. This combination. It's not all one. Because we have to get things done. We have to do. We have to produce. We have to make sure that which drives our society. That which has turned our society into such a healthy society. The memory of enslavement in Egypt helps the Jewish people remain aware that they can fall victim to the slavery of things, of work, of production, or even victimize others through this. So the Sabbath, and the practice of Sabbath sets these limits on work by reserving a day in which work is not permitted for anyone, including employees, family and friends, and even animals. I don't know if you can get your mind wrapped around that and create a visual image in your head what that would look like in the first week of June 2016 in the society in which we live. A complete stop. These biblical foundations give rise to a day that is like no other, and is in fact the pinnacle and the focus of all other days. As Rabbi Herschel said, and I shared at the beginning, the Sabbath is the counterpoint of living. The melody sustained throughout all the agitations which menace our conscience, the things that really agitate us, and our awareness of God's presence in the world. See, the other days of the week derive their meaning and reason for existence from Sabbath and are a journey towards it, not the other way around. Jews place limits on the world as it is, and Orthodox Jews sometimes, and they're known for their extreme practices and ways of defining things, but sometimes they will tie a string around the perimeter of their community as a tangible sign that within the string, people are living in sacred time so they can live the dream of how it should be. It's not an escape, but it's an insistence on renewing the covenant and rejecting the claims of a society whose goals and whose values are profoundly different from and often adverse to the dream that God established for all. Now, if you were to sort of be able to draw back and see the big picture of this concept of Sabbath taking place in a Jewish home, it would look something like this. Typically 25 hours. It requires important physical and spiritual and emotional preparation. The home is cleaned. It's a good way to get your house clean. And people take particular care to wash and dress for the occasion and to prepare their spirit for the Sabbath. Special foods are prepared. Friends are invited. For the Sabbath is thought to be better if those who have nowhere else to go are welcome. Generosity and love are the roots. Emphasis is placed upon relations with one another, with family, with friends, with God. And through joining together and singing and praying and eating together and rejoicing in their relationship, the Jewish people observe the Sabbath, insist on creating and living in a special time that connects them to their identity as a covenant people. It's a very difficult concept. And even more difficult to practice on a consistent basis. But these tangible acts are a way of resting in their faith, resting in their God, and in each other. And because of this ability to rest and restore, they can continue to reach for the dream of healing in a broken world. Oh, but you say we're not Jewish. So what's it all mean? Well, let's transpose it to contemporary Christian life. This Sabbath rest. Because I think it's pretty clear and it's pretty obvious that it runs smack dab against the grain of dominant Western culture, where issues of wealth in particular merit the construction and maintenance of a very secure spiritual foundation from which to draw support and perspective. It's kind of not the norm, let's say. Given the overwhelming consumerist nature of our society, trying to live kingdom ideals when it comes to money and things is not only difficult, but profoundly countercultural. It is not supported or condoned by the mainstream. On the contrary, it's considered suspicious, idealistic, naive, well, probably crazy. But think about it. Holy rest challenges our individualism. And it reminds us that we need each other. The manual for discipleship, if it existed, would come with a warning. And this would be the warning: do not try this alone. Christ following is fundamentally expressed in community. Jesus formed a community of disciples, and he sent the disciples forth in groups, not individually. And he promised that where 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, that he would be there in the midst of them. The Holy Spirit descended not on one person. It descended in community, creating church. And our continuous process of conversion is both realized and expressed in community. So, it's not something we do on an island by ourselves. In short, discipleship, Christ following, has never been a solitary endeavor. And even less so now. For if we're even going to try to live kingdom values and kingdom ideals in our contemporary culture, we need time together as a community and immerse ourselves in God's culture. So as we who follow Jesus try to balance our own call to work for God's reign in our own lives, and balance that with our need for rest and renewal, we can learn much from those who have so beautifully integrated it into the demands and the gifts of their own faith. And we can live like discipleship that Matthew describes for us in Jesus' words, "Come to me, all of you who are labored and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you," Jesus says, "and learn from me, and you will find rest for yourselves." That's a balance of fully committed action in the world centered by time to renew and rest. Is our fundamental identity as God's beloved. It's who we are, as beloved by God. I love the way Wendell Berry images things on his farm there in West Virginia. He says the sense of it may come with watching a flock of cedar waxwings eating wild grapes in the top of the woods on a November afternoon. Everything they do is leisurely. They pick the grapes with a curious deliberation. They comb their feathers. They converse in high, windy whistles. And now and then one will fly out and back in a sort of dancing flight full of whimsical flutters and turns. They are like farmers loafing in their fields on Sunday, though they have no Sundays. Their days are full of Sabbaths. Barbara Taylor Brown, who I quoted and read from her book earlier, has this little thing to say about the Sabbath. Greg, do you want to play the video?
Let's revisit Sabbath, but let's do point out that, at least for me, a loss or a decline in productivity is a practice in death, because it's productivity is the universal sort of needs of Adam and one another. I mean, it cashes out in dollars a lot, but it cashes out in fame, it cashes out in other ways, but it's to be productive, to produce. Even some of our language around purpose in religious community, I worry sometimes, because there are people for whom purpose is as far away as the moon, and yet are they less for that? So Sabbath seems to me like the built-in, I mean, it's just a tonic. It's a weekly tonic. It's built into the teaching, built into the fabric of the universe, that once a week you're supposed to quit being good for anything. But your creatureliness, and perhaps also pleasure. I mean, that's the thing about Sabbath, is the pleasure of no work, but plenty of food and company for dinner, and all the rest of it. But I'll tell you, if you live in the Sabbath for a while, it's a little death. It's a little day on which you can't earn anything, and don't buy or sell. And there's some real, it makes you almost faint for a while, to give up all the things that keep you propped up the rest of the week. So I've always thought there's a kind of yin and yang to Sabbath. People flock to it for the rest part, the hammock part. But once they get into it, there's the looking into the night sky part, which is, why am I here?
Sabbath ceasing means to cease not only from work itself, but also from the need to accomplish and to be productive. From the worry and tension that accompany our modern creation of efficiency, from our efforts to be in control of our lives as if we were God. From our possessiveness and our enculturation. And finally, from the humdrum and the meaninglessness that result when life is pursued without the Lord at the center of it all. The 1995 movie Waiting to Exhale was a movie that was developed and created out of Terry McMillan's novel about 4 African American women waiting for true love to find them. Waiting to enter a relationship of commitment and nurture where they could let their guard down, where they would be valued for who they were, a place just to be, a place to be sheltered, a place to be cherished. And McMillan describes this state of painful anticipation as waiting to exhale. I think that's a fitting description, it seems to me, of the way we live our lives these days. No downtime, 24/7, always on, always striving, secretly yearning for that place of nurture. Safety and that place of refreshment already offered to us by God. But we keep looking. We keep working, hoping that we can create it. One we do well to reclaim, because it's already there, by rediscovering the gift of the Sabbath. Because at the end of the day, friends, Sabbath is resting in God. That place of deeper intimacy. That place where God reveals Himself to us. And it's also that place that God reveals to us our true selves. Not, as Richard Gore talks about, our false selves, but our true selves. After laying down our own agendas and releasing our own forced self-concept and the self that the world tells us to be, Sabbath is those moments that God is able to reveal the truth of who we are. Who are we? Who am I? And who we're called to be in Him. It's in Christ, Paul writes to the Ephesians, that we find out who we are and what we are living for. It is out of Christ that we move forth from Sabbath into renewed calling of work. May we honestly pray at the end of Sabbath rest these words. Father, send us out into the world to do the work you have given us to do. Let us pray. How frightened we are of Sabbath, Jesus. How afraid that if we stop, we'll fall behind. We'll have less than we want. We'll lose out to those who don't stop. How driven we are to protect ourselves, to hoard what we can get, to rise above the crowd, and how wounded we and our world have become because we have forsaken the wisdom of Sabbath. Teach us again how to be Sabbath people, Jesus, how to trust you for our daily bread, how to resist the urge to accumulate and hoard, how to defy the pressure to have more, be more, do more. Teach us to dance to the rhythms of your reign, Jesus, to work meaningfully and rest peacefully, to enjoy shamelessly and share generously, to love abundantly and include indiscriminately. Teach us that the small, daily Sabbath choices we make to trade fairly and consume responsibly, to treat others with dignity and respect, these will liberate us all from the crippling weight of greed and fear, and heal those whose lives are bent and broken from Sabbathlessness.